Hello and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for being here. My name is Yetmir Yashari and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, The Evolution of EU Cyber Legislation, How NIS2 is Shaping the Future. We're thrilled to dive into this very important topic and even more delighted to be joined by our speakers, Mr. Peter Geelen and Johan de Kock. Before we get started, I'd like to inform the audience that this session will be recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel, along with the slides of this presentation. Furthermore, an attestation of webinar completion worth 1 CPD credit will be issued within 1 week to all attendees who participate in at least 60% of the live session. Lastly, we encourage you to engage throughout by submitting your questions using the questions box, the Q&A feature, and we'll address as many as we can during the Q&A segment in the end. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, Peter.
Thanks, Edmir. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, just to add on a bit to what the colleague mentioned, we also record the Q&As, and very likely we will see a lot of questions. We will publish also the overview and answers to the questions later on the LinkedIn page, which has been activated already, but we will fill up the page with the valuable feedback of Johan and me in that sense, so that you can reuse the information. Also, you will notice that we provided also lots of interesting links, so we will make them directly accessible by loading them on the LinkedIn page, and we'll come back to that one at the end of the webinar. Yeah, I don't think I need a lot of introduction myself. Have been teaching quite some classes for PCB already for the last few years. I'm one of the titanium trainers also for PCB, having a lot of fun in teaching the classes to participants and sharing knowledge, and that's exactly also one of the purposes of today. So yeah, it's a bit of a hot topic, and for that reason, as I got the invite and the question actually to talk about NIS2 and what the current state of the system is on NIS2 in Europe and the implementation on that one, I kindly invited you on. I will leave it up to him to introduce himself quickly, and then we'll get started to do the webinar. Well, Johan, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Peter. My name is Johan de Kock. I have more than 27 years of experience in the information technology sector. The last 10 to 12 years, I was more focusing on information security, personal information security, and cybersecurity. In that role, I am also a certified ISO 27001 and 27701 auditor. And for the last 3 years, I joined the Center of Cybersecurity in Belgium as a cybersecurity and certification expert.
Good, and that's of course full on topic of today. So the idea is to first of all to highlight a bit what NIS2 is very quickly, because we already had quite some interesting webinars the last few weeks and months since the activation of NIS2. But certainly currently I get a lot of questions from my customers and people in my network. What's the current status of the NIS2? What do we need to do? And that's exactly what we're going to answer for today. So let me quickly walk through the agenda with you. Again, just a bit of a wrap up what NIS2 is exactly. Probably most of you will know, else you wouldn't be here unless you're discovering your network a bit. So we will provide you with a bit of a view, and also a very important question for most of the people and companies: how is it impacting me? What do I need to be aware of? We will provide you with some interesting links, and we will collect some information and show you. Then very important, because lately and the last few weeks, if not months, lots of things have changed over the state of implementation of NIS2, and that's exactly what I'm quickly going to explain. What the current status is, of course, is a moving target, but then you at least know where to look at and to wonder if you have certain area of activities and that you should be impacted, yes or no, with NIS2. And then, quickly, we'll discuss a bit what kind of methods you can use to implement NIS2, what kind of approaches you can take, and one of the more practical ones will be the second part of this presentation today. Because the Belgian government has implemented a certification framework, and Johan will deep dive, I will explain to us how it's moving, which is called the CyberFundamentals, or the CyFun in short. It's a very practical framework organized by the Belgian government, and the good news is that actually more and more governments in Europe will adopt this approach. So there's a lot of things moving, and this will help you actually to demonstrate compliance, and that's what we're going to check. So we will focus on the practical point of view, how to implement it, and give you some pointers how to get started with it. Also, you will see that not all slides will be covered during the explanation by me or by Johan. You will notice that there will be some additional slides with some notes included, so you can download them after the webinar and use the links. And of course, we will also complete our LinkedIn page with these practical links, so you can actually use as much as possible what you have seen and learned from today. So let's get started. You had the introduction for myself and Johan. Also, the LinkedIn connections are available for us, so feel free to build your network, to grow your network, and to get in touch. Anyway, if you have any practical questions, whatever kind of questions you have, feel free to use the chat or the question window. They are recorded, and we will make sure that every single question will get an answer, although that the webinar is limited in time, and we have some flexibility, but we can't probably answer all the questions fully actually during the webinar, but you will get an answer in written, and you can always consult the answers afterwards. Also, the other questions that people will ask during the sessions will be answered. Very important is also to realize what is NIS2. Just a quick wrap in that case. In essence, there are two major components when we talk about NIS2. First of all, it's cybersecurity legislation, and it's a directive, which means that the consequence of a directive in the European context means that actually Europe will set some guidelines, will set some directives on legislative level, but the major consequence of the directive is that actually the states, the member states, still need to implement local legislations, national legislations, to comply with the European legislation. So it's a slight or an important difference, for example, with regulations, and the most well-known regulation in that sense is GDPR, for example, the data protection regulation. Regulation is published by Europe, of course, after lots of discussions, but in essence, regulations will apply immediately and directly to all the member states, although there is some flexibility in the adoption in some areas of the regulation. For example, in GDPR, you can decide what is the definition of a minor, so there is some flexibility in applying the regulations. That's slightly different for directives, like for example NIS2. A few months ago, end of last year, the regulation was actually set, was published, and there was a sort of time frame launched actually, so to make sure that the regulations actually were published and adopted actually in the situation. That's exactly what we are going to explain today and give you a bit of a status and an overview. If you want to know more, I've linked here the direct page, and to go to the legal context actually of the NIS2, and additional information will be there also in other slides. Very important also to know that there was already an earlier version of the NIS directive, and which is now called NIS1, initially just NIS. But there are some major differences in the NIS2. Mainly, the NIS1 was focusing on highly critical sectors, production sectors, economic sectors, but the NIS2 is now enlarging, of extending that reach, including, for example, public sector, governmental agencies, also digital platforms, for example, like web shops or even hosted providers, including, for example, also managed service providers, and including also managed security service providers. We will not deep dive in the exact details because you can easily discover this also, for example, in the NIS2 courses at PECB, so have a look at it. If you need more information, so let us know. But in essence, the directive is a European level legislation that forces companies that operate in Europe or potentially where people using services in Europe to be secure and to build in a certain reliability or business continuity actually for the digital platforms, right? Please be aware that NIS2 is not standing on itself. It's a package actually within the directives and the combination of legislation. So there's a strategy that is actually hosted by the European Commission and the European agencies. NIS2 is only part of that one, and one of the most well-known legislations that will impact, for example, digital security is, for example, GDPR, but that's certainly together with NIS2 not the only one. You might have seen the publication of the NIS2, and you notice that in the same publication there were additional legislations included, like the CER, critical entities regulations, but also very closely to the same publication was DORA, which is more or less the NIS2 for the financial sector. So they apply the same principles in a certain level, but they require in some of the levels different requirements. So also one important item over here is that if you operate in different sectors in different regions, please be careful that you might be impacted by other legislations, not only NIS2. On the other hand, you will notice that within the legislations for NIS2, they will point out also to other legislations. Just a practical example, if there is a cyber incident, very likely there is also a data breach, which also means, for example, that the data protection authority will be notified of that data breach almost automatically, depending on the legislation, depending on the protocol. So usually cyber incidents go together with data breaches on GDPR level, which is important to know. Other legislations and also other best practices, and that's what you might have seen also on the ISO level, will also link to cybersecurity, and one of the most recent ones, for example, is also the AI Act. You know that most of the cases legislations will follow after a few years of implementation, but please realize that you should be aware that NIS2 is interwoven, is linking to other legislations, which can post some other additional requirements actually to comply with. So please be careful. It's quite challenging in that sense, and certainly for a security architect or CISOs, for example, that need to comply with these legislations, it might be very interesting actually to make a log, to make an overview of the applicable legislations. And depending on your activities, depending on your regions, the legislation might be different. And this is also one of the challenges, for example, with NIS2, because the various regions and the countries will implement NIS2 slightly different. So you should be aware of how it impacts you in that case. Just a quick recap in what level companies will be impacted by NIS2. I made it very short. It's certainly not complete, but one of the major principles is, first of all, the size of the company, and a second thing, I will provide you with a graphic also posted on the websites of the European Commission and NISA. And NISA is the cybersecurity authority on European level, which is a bit of the counterpart, for example, also in the US side on the NIST. So they also provide some guidance and some best practices. I will show you a few during this webinar. One important thing here, and Johan will also explain on that level, is how NIS2 and the application of NIS2 applies. But one important thing is to consider is what kind of conditions apply if I need to comply with NIS2, yes or no. There's a direct implementation, meaning that there are some mathematical conditions, and there are 3 of them. within the legislation. And there is also indirect implementation, meaning that maybe you are below the thresholds for the legal application or the mathematical application, but in case that your customers, suppliers, so there's indirect pressure or even contractual pressure actually to be compliant with NIS2, you still need to know what the requirements are of NIS2. And in some of the conditions, you might not consider NIS2, but depending on the severity of the cyber incidents you suffer, there might be some conditions that your cyber authority might still consider you as an important. So depending on the incidents and the impact of incidents on your activity, you might actually be impacted also by NIS2. And of course, NIS2 is referring also to best practices, like for example, ISO 27001, like the SIS controls, like NIST, for example, and Johan will explain a bit the compilation that they did in the implementation with the Belgian government to do so. It will be very clear at the end of the slides when it applies. Going back a bit to the mathematical calculations, what are the conditions? First of all, it's very important that the number of staff actually working with the companies is a very important threshold, is 50. So as of 50, there are some additional conditions you need to check. The two financial conditions in the legislations is the annual turnover and the balance total. I will not go too much in detail, but one of the important numbers you should remember here is the 10 million. Also, there is some flexibility in the interpretation to do so, but one of the things in essence, if your annual turnover or your balance total, so the total value of the company in essence, is around or over 10 million, you should be alarmed actually to check the conditions for NIS2. Anyway, I usually advise if you're close to these limits or you're hosting services, for example, for critical companies matching these conditions, that you should actually consider NIS2. But this is one of the main triggers to consider NIS2. And of course, very important, quite an important change also in NIS2, and you can easily download the guides, and Johan will show you later on also some practical and a bit more detailed guides, for example, by the Belgian government and by the CCP. They've made quite some practical guides that you can implement on top of the information you get from ENISA and the European Commission. But you see, for example, that on top of the highly critical sectors, and which is energy, transport, for example, health, and so on. And we had a reference to digital infrastructure already, that NIS2 is extending the reach actually of this legislation to quite some important sectors, although that manufacturing and production, for example, is pretty close to a few of these digital sectors. But now also, for example, financial markets is included, public administration is included. So there's quite some important sectors right now. You can imagine, for example, if National Bank or, for example, some of the governmental agencies break down during an attack, and for example, DDoS attack, there might be significant impact to the social community in that case. And that is one of the main parameters when a company is considered as important or highly critical, depending on the evaluation in NIS2. So please be careful, check the sectors, and there are quite some interesting hints and tips in that case to do so. If you want to know a bit more information, you can first of all go check with ENISA. I provided the link, and they actually segmented a bit of the explanations. By the way, if you want to walk through in a guided way on this one, this is exactly also the structure that you might see, for example, in the PECB NIS2 courses. And we will explain a bit more detail with practical examples, actually what you need to know, what obligations are, and so on. So I will not go into detail too much because we don't have a lot of time actually to do so. But one important thing here is at least at the end, for example, also is please be aware that just a few years ago, at the beginning of NIS2, the directive was published, but over time, and that is pretty much the same as what will happen also is happening, and by the way, by GDPR, you will see over time that the legislation is adapted, is interpreted. So you will see, for example, also right now there are quite some additional guidelines and also facts, frequently asked questions about the application of the legislations, not only on European level, and I linked here the information specifically from European level, but later on, and I will discuss also the application of NIS2 in the various countries. You can easily go to the authority responsible for cybersecurity of your country, of other countries, for example, and check for the guidelines. And for example, in Belgium is one of the first to explain in detail with some practical guidelines, with evaluation tools, with sheets and assessments, for example. So there's a lot of practical things on top of the indication that Europe will provide to you. And you can actually get a lot of practical help for free and public accessible actually to start implementing or to tune your implementation for NIS2. So if you want to implement an information security management system like, for example, NIST or ISMS by ISO 27001, you can check these details and tune your situation specifically for your organization or for your customers. One important thing I wanted to highlight a bit, and what is the current situation? It's not always clear, but I provided two links, and you might see a slight difference actually between the one that Europe is provided and which is hosted in the digital strategy link, and that's the first one on this page. While the other one is a bit more up to date, and I know, and this link is also provided thanks to CCB in this case, the NIS directive transposition tracker by ECS is up to date and will provide you some links actually per country, so you can quickly access them per country. Actually, also the cyber authorities are mentioned, so you can deep dive and with links to the legislations and look at the current stage, or if there are any requirements per country to do so. And you see that even after the start of the implementation of NIS2, there's still a lot of red or non-implemented NIS situations right now. I will show the bit larger map over here. You see a slight difference on the left-hand side. So the reference between the current publication of the community and the European Commission versus EXO. EXO is a bit more up to date. The European Commission published the last of the recent numbers in May. Meanwhile, there has been some changes, but the good news is more and more countries are adopting and implementing the NIS2. But still, very important to realize here is that still quite some larger companies, including France, Germany, for example, are not yet there actually to implement, although that many of these legislations are in draft mode. They are not fully published. And in the second level, that's what we're going to show you today also, is that these implementations with guidance is not there yet. So this is one of the nice opportunities with Belgium, for example. They adopted the law as one of the first. They provided a very nice framework to help you out and to apply and to comply with these legislations, and that's exactly what we're going to explain to you. So keep an eye actually on these links. You can quickly monitor them. So if you have operations in any of these countries, you might be impacted, and the regulations or the requirements for your country might change over time. So have an eye on it. This is literally something you should keep in your close range actually to monitor. So if you operate in many of these European countries, you will be impacted one way or another. On top of the implementation itself, is also important to realize that Europe will interpret the documentations, will provide guidance, and certainly the NIS has been very active into provide mappings or some hints and tips also to how to implement NIS2. So next to the geographical adoption, you can also see quite some hints and tips, and one of the important ones, for example, is how to react, or what kind of skills do you need, for example, if you want to be involved in NIS2 implementation, what is required for security profiles, for example. So ENISA provided a publication on the impact of NIS2 on these cybersecurity roles, and you can actually go look for it. So there are a lot of companies that then use these guides actually to offer trainings to adopt their offerings in many cases. But yeah, it's a quite important help to see what you need to apply to NIS2. And also, certainly for small organizations, this is the reason I added also the link to the digital SME, which is a sort of community for smaller organizations and small businesses, SMBs or SMEs. So there's a community, and they provide some studies and some guides for specific SMEs, both directly under the NIS2 or mostly, as these companies are a supplier actually to NIS2 companies. They provide some help and tips in that. And of course, at the end of the slide, you will see some very nice toolings also, but Johan will explain in the next modules what you can do with these guidances. And for example, have a check on the CCB website. I will provide the link in this slide, and at the end, you can cross-check them. They have very nice NIS2 guidance and toolings, and more specifically, an implementation of cybersecurity models actually for small organizations, which is the CyberFundamentals, also shortened into CyFun. But we'll exactly cover this in the second part of the presentations. Before we go that way, and I will leave the word actually to Johan to explain how these frameworks work. There are a few choices as in the NIS2. There is a reference also to best practices or to frameworks in more general, specifically, for example, the adoption of the 2701. Please be aware that the 2701 is a series of documents. So we have the ISMS, or Information Security Management System, which can be extended or adopted with other frameworks, including 27032 for cybersecurity, or 2717 and 2718, for example, for cloud security and combination of data protection. But also, for example, with the NIST CSF, and the cybersecurity framework, which is a very well-known American framework. The most important difference between the ISO and the NIST is that, first of all, the ISO is an international organization which discusses a lot of global best practices, but overall, the implementation of ISO stays on a very high level, architecture level, while the NIST documentation goes mostly deep dive on practical implementations with a practical checklist. There's a lot of details in most of the cases. I added a third line here specifically for NIS2, which is called the IEC, that's 62443, which is the best practices standard for OT environments, or operational technology and SCADA systems. Please be aware that there is a new version up and coming. I'm not sure if it already is published recently, because this year, very shortly, there will be a new version of the 62443, which is very much aligned, but then for OT, which is very much aligned also with the 2701. So the 62443, a bit more technical, will very close to the 27001. And you will see that these components and management systems, even with operational security, is one of the key foundations actually of implementing NIS2 and finding some guidelines that one might be very handy. Also very important, there's a lot of pressure also into certification. So one of the most well-known certification is ISO certification, ISO 27001. So for example, within the NIST application, there's very little support, and there's another general framework, for example, globally for certifying the NIST, although you can perfectly implement the NIST CSF and certify it if you implement the right way. You can certify it against ISO 2701 because there's a lot of common functions actually to do so. But this was certainly for smaller company one of the major hurdles actually to prove compliance actually with the NIS2. So that's why the Belgian Cybersecurity Authority created CyberFundamentals, which is sort of mini program to start with based on the NIS2 requirements. And Johan will explain to you now in details what the CyberFundamentals is. So Johan, it's up to you. Go ahead. Please let me know if I need to shift the slides. I will try to follow your story and the pace, but anyway, if I'm too slow, let me know. I will shift the slides.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, first of all, we at the CCB created the CyberFundamentals. CyberFundamentals was not intended to be used in basically on the NIS2 legislation, but it was the idea of let's create something to help our companies in Belgium and especially our SMEs. Why? Because one of our objectives of Belgium was making Belgium one of the least cyber vulnerable countries. And then we created CyberFundamentals, and CyberFundamentals is created on a set on actual measures. And we had three main ideas. We would like to protect the data. We would like to reduce the risks on the most common cyber attacks, and not that less important is the increase and organization on the cyber resilience act. We would like to do that in three things: by building trust, sharing knowledge, and to get insights on the threats in general.
And this is one of the important features also for NIS2, right, Johan? So learning from what you suffered and sharing that information with other people, possible victims, right?
Yeah, indeed, definitely. Because you need to report anyway. Great. So, next.
Yeah, next slide is how is it positioned in EU, Johan?
Well, we are in Belgium. We created a CyberFundamentals scheme. We created it under the European accreditation. So that means that we have a mutual recognition procedure, and that we have an agreement to use CyberFundamentals, and it's recognized in several countries. We as Belgium are the primary scheme owner, but until now, Ireland and Romania are also working together with us to do updates on the scheme if necessary. Portugal is at the moment an observing member. Croatian has it in his legislation. There is a base for CyFun, and Mr. Strubel from ANSI explained actually that using CyberFundamentals is not that a bad idea. So, and they're trying, or they're thinking of using it as well in France, but it's not official yet.
They're kind of adopting it or accepting it as a good best practice at least. And as France is not publishing the final versions of the NIS2 in France yet, but there's a very big chance actually that France will adopt also the CyFun, as I understand correctly, right?
And this is one of the ideas that we can have CyFun, that it can be used within Europe, so that if the labels are the maturity labels, what I will talk about in a couple of minutes, that they will be they will have a European recognition. So that is a very interesting point of the CyberFundamentals framework and the labeling. Next slide, please, Peter. So, okay, we can ask who can use CyFun. Actually, every company can use CyFun. It can be used by private and public entities. In Belgium, you have an NIS2 presumption of compliance when you're implementing CyberFundamentals, because it's in our Belgian legislation. It's not stated CyFun or CyberFundamentals, but it's a framework, and we're supporting the framework. You can use it as well to have the supply chain security assurance, and you can demonstrate the resilience to other companies like banks or insurance companies.
So this is linking a bit also to DORA, for example, or the support of resilience to the DORA requirements, right?
Yeah. Definitely agreed on that one. And what also is very important, you can use it without any legislation. So any company can go to our website, cyfun.eu or cyfun.be, can download all the tools, self-assessment schemes, risk assessments, manuals. We have some explanations. We have everything there. We have even templates for policies that can be used by anybody to everybody. So feel free to go there. And again, the main important thing is that it's under accreditation, and it's a very low cost at this moment, because
So
we are
it's a bit
working.
of a light version what the US NIST has been doing actually for their cybersecurity framework, the CSF, right?
Yeah, correct, indeed. Well, we are picking some things out of several frameworks, and we are mapping them as well with the existing frameworks and existing certification paths. So yeah, you can use it. Again, CyberFundamentals, we created it in 4 levels, but we're talking especially for the SMEs and other companies, we're talking about the basic, important, and essential level. Small is actually for very, very small companies who don't have any idea on information security. They can read small manual that's also available on our website, and there you will have some non-technical guidance and recommendations to what you should do in your company to get at least a minimum of cybersecurity and information security in place. So CyberFundamentals Framework is created on some other legislations or other frameworks, sorry. As Peter already mentioned, you have ISO 27001 and 002 that can be used. We used as well the NIS CSF. We are using the sys controls, and we are mapping as well with the IEC 62443. A very important thing that we checked and what we would like to have, what we like to do was, okay, you have a framework. Is it a valid framework and a good framework to implement if we are going to map it with the current attacks in real life? So we went to our CERT department, the Cybersecurity Emergency Response Team. And apparently, if you're implementing the 34 controls of the basic level, you can cover 82% of the attacks. If you're implementing the maturity level important and you will implement 117 controls, apparently we can counter 94% of the attacks. And if we are mapping or implementing the essential maturity level, we can apparently counter 100% of the attacks. I really also know that countering all attacks, 100% attacks, is not feasible. I mean, there will be always somebody who can get an attack, but at the moment that we checked the incidents and the attacks, and we checked it with our framework, we agreed on 100% countering the attacks that were already there. So that's the reason why we
not necessarily avoiding these attacks, Johan, but actually trying to minimize the impact, or at least predicting the impact actually of these attacks as much as possible. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah, correct. If we can have the next slide, Peter. Okay. So why took we NIS CSF as a starting point? Well, it's common and accessible language. That's very important. And even then, some guidance is really necessary. And we put a lot of effort in writing guidance for everybody. And it's adaptable to many technologies. You have the life cycle phases, it can be used in several sectors and by everybody. It's risk-based, same as we have with the ISO 27002. It's also risk-based, so there is still some alignment in there. It's based also on international standards. Very interesting is as well that it's a living document, so there are frequently updates as we speak already now. We have already NIS CSF 2.0 that is active and it's in place. So that means that we will do an update on the CyberFundamentals framework in alignment with NIS CSF 2.0. And again, it's guided by a lot of by many angles. That means that the private sector is involved, academia is involved, the public sector is involved. So everybody is involved in creating the NIS CSF on the States. So that's the reason why we have NIS CSF as a starting point. So we have 5 core functions within CyberFundamentals or CyFun. That means that we will first of all do the identification of the assets and what are the risks. We would like to protect them or create some steps to safeguard the organization's assets. Then we will do detecting, like routinely monitoring or alert for problems. Then if we have an issue, plan for the worst, get ready to act, and then get back to normal after an incident. So these are the 5 core functions within CyberFundamentals: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Again, we are now on the CyberFundamentals levels, assurance levels. Here we see that we have the framework created within basic, important, and essentials. And for these for those 3 maturity levels, we create an Excel sheet. And in the Excel sheet, you will see the controls, so the requirements that need to be implemented. You will have some guidance, and we are doing mappings to other references of norms. So we have a mapping to the NIS CSF, we have a mapping to the ISO, we have a mapping to the SIS controls, and we have a mapping to the 62443. Very important if you're doing the implementation of the highest level, like the essential level of CyberFundamentals, you can have also a presumption of conformity with an ISO 27001 certificate. So that is also very important information from my point of view. So you have the three levels. You start also always with basic. You will have basic, then you can have the important level, and at the end the essential level. It's building up in front. So in the essential level, you will also have the important controls, and you will have also the basic controls that are implemented and are need to be implemented. Very interesting and very important here in our framework is that we are working with key measures. Key measures are really key measures or controls that are implemented really on real life threats. So again, as I said earlier, we have the framework, we have mapped it with, or let it checked with the CERT team, and the main real life threats, they will be there and they will be covered by the key measures.
So the key measures are based actually on the coverage you explained earlier on.
Yeah. Key measures is non-negotiable. You should implement them, and that's it. Again, as we said, you can do an evaluation or a verification. Can you go back?
Go back one.
Slide?
Sorry. There we go back. There it is.
Yes, so. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. So you have you can have an evaluation, self-assessment first of all within the company. But if you would like to go to a maturity level and you would like to have an accredited verification of your important assurance level, you should keep in mind the scores below, like the minimum key measure maturity should be on the basic level 2.5 on 5. Important, it should be higher than 2 at the 3 out of 5. And that will be, that's quite important to take back into account when you're implementing CyberFundamentals. Now you can go to the next slide, Peter. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
So, as I already mentioned, how is it built up? You have, for example, you have the function protection. You have the category on access management, on access control. Then you have the subcategory, and then you will get the requirement. The green requirement is the basic requirement. That means that this is, if you're going to implement the basic assurance level, this is one of the requirements that you need to fulfill. Again, it's a key measure, so there is no discussion on it. You need to implement it. So, but if you go to the higher level to important, then you will need to have the basic requirement that should be implemented, and then you should add the requirement for the important one. In this case, it's where feasible automated mechanisms shall be implemented to support the management of user accounts. And again, if you need to go for, or if you would like to implement the essential assurance level of cyber fundamentals, then you should have the basic requirement implemented, the important requirement implemented, and there will be an additional requirement for the essential. So it's really building up from basic by important to essential. So here we have the mapping. It's a very huge Excel sheet, but there you can see for each requirement in our Cyber Fundamentals framework, you can see which clause or reference or control that is mapping with, for example, ISO 27001, 002, the sys controls. We have the OT standards that are also mapped. So yeah, you can even easily take cyber fundamentals and edit in your statement of applicability, for example, when you're implementing ISO 27001.
Good.
Next slide, please, Peter. Now, the key measures. I already spoke about them, but as an American sports brand just do it. It's the same with our key measures. And they are for basic, they are not that heavy. I mean, if you double check them, it's basically cyber hygiene or good cyber governance. I know it's a challenge for a lot of companies to get already those things in place, but it's really, really, really important that you do a minimum of those 10 basic key measures. The advantage on cyber fundamentals or CyFun is it's measurable. So we have divided it in two maturity levels, or in two maturity scoring. We have documentation and implementation, and for documentation and implementation, you have each 5 different levels of maturity. Again, here you have the for example, this is an example that you can also find on our website. So you see the difference between the implementation and the documentation. I know there are some percentages on there. It might be difficult to score on the percentages there, but if the main message is more in the other text than on the percentages as well. So it's very interesting to get there, and yeah, you can see, you can play with a bit with those maturity levels on the documentation and implementation. And yeah, but of course, if the documentation is not that good, it might be that the implementation is better, but that it's not documented. So that's the reason why we divided it into sectors like documentation and implementation. So again, here we have all our tools that are available on the website of the CCB. Again, we have the self-assessment tool. You can put your scoring in there, and then automatically he will give you the end score at the end of the page. Then you will see if your scores are in line with what is needed for your maturity level that you would like to have. And you're aiming
these are the reference that you mentioned earlier on, Johan, with the 2.5 or the 3 or 3.5 is actually referenced over here.
Indeed. So there you can see, and even if you're using the self-assessment tool, there are also tabs in with scorings and with some graphs. So if you need to go to management, you can use those graphs and put them in the presentation, and you can see also where you have more and more work to do at your company. Again, we have also created a Belgian CyFun essential selection tool. It's more like a risk assessment. What is this tool? What does this tool do? You have the Excel sheets, and again, you can see which is your what is your risk on several threats, and then you can give it you can score it, and at the end you will see the result like, okay, in this case you should implement CyFun level essential. And if you have the CyFun, then you know that you should implement the CyFun essential. Then you can go to the self-assessment tool. You can implement all the requirements that are necessary. You can score them. Then you can see in your chart or in the mapping next to it, what are the scores that we are getting and what are the scores that we should have. And luckily, there is a mapping between CyberFundamentals and different frameworks, so you can even reuse existing information, documentation, procedures, policies, whatever. And everything is available also in English. So we have it, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have it in English, French, Dutch, and German. So everything is available on cyfun.eu or cyfun.be. What are the advantages of CyberFundamentals or CyFun? So it's only one system, and you can use it for all sectors. It's low cost because it's it's not a low cost to implement it, but it's a low cost to get everything, all information that it needs to be available. It's low cost because it's everything is freely available on our website. In Belgium currently, it's very interesting because you can do a supply chain level, can be easily assessed, because in Belgium, if you say, okay, I have a CyberFundamentals label essential, your customer knows in Belgium what the CyberFundamentals assurance level essential is. So there is no difference between statement of applicabilities or scoping or whatever. So if you say, okay, I'm CyberFundamental maturity assurance level basic, they know what's in there.
Sort of common reference standard, right?
Yeah, indeed, you have a cross-reference, so it could be fine. It's effective and efficient supervision because, yeah, it can be verified by a conformity assessment body, and we as government, we are doing the supervision on it for the moment. There is a recognized method for managing board member responsibilities. It comes without saying, of course. A reference framework for insurance companies, so that it's in Belgium the case. So if you can show the insurance company that you have implemented a certain level of CyberFundamentals, it might be interesting to have a negotiation on the price, for example.
Because you mentioned actually in the slide that different scenarios of attacks are covered to a certain level, so they know also what it's going to cost if one of these attacks is being executed on your environment. At least an estimate is not always sure, but at least you know what kind of coverage is being set up.
Indeed, yeah, indeed. It's cross-sector education. And then again, if we go, so for the summary of our CyberFundamentals framework, it's focusing on both awareness and training, technical security measures, and governance. So it's the process, people, and technology measures that are implementing. It's a multi-standard framework. There is guidance available. There is a proportional requirements. It's for now, it's embedded within the framework for all Belgian entities, including the BE NIS entities, and it's enabling to define each owns grown path. So that means that you can now start with a basic, you can build it up to important, and at the end, if it's necessary by Belgian NIS 2 law that you should have an essential level, you can build it up to essential. Again, you have a self-assessment, so you can have an internal or external audit and or certification. There are two kinds of certification. Well, no, you have the certification and then you have the attestation on the verification. So you can receive a verification claim if necessary. On basic and important, we have verification with a verification claim and a label that can be asked for it. If we're talking about CyberFundamentals essential assurance level, like the highest level, then we are talking about a certification like an ISO 27000 or one certification, but then on a CyberFundamentals certification.
And as you mentioned, Johan, it's updated, so there is some good news, right? So for the next few weeks.
Yes. It's good news for all of you, a bit not that good news for us, because that means that we need to go back into the framework. But there will be a new version available of CyberFundamentals, and it will be version 2025, and it will be released somewhere in Q4 of this year. Why is that? Because we implemented the NIS CSF 2.0, and we also added, and it's now more and more aligned with the European legislation. So also it incorporates recent developments in information and cybersecurity. We received a lot of user feedback and we integrated them in the new version. We have expanded the focus on the supply chain security and on the OT part, because that's more and more important, especially if you would like to add it on the NIS 2 legislation. We have some reformulation on guidelines and controls, so it will be more clear to understand, to implement, and also for our colleague auditors, it will be more easy to get results on the audit of the requirements or measures. It adds also a specific goal to each control to improve the understanding. There is indeed also more and more guidance. We introduced and added governance measures because that was a bit missing in the other version. But now since NIS CSF 2.0 is also implementing governance, we are also implementing it. And very interesting and very important is as well that it's more auditability for the essential assurance level. And we created a new streamlined spreadsheet with only the core requirements, so it's easier for the management. And yeah, we did some editorial spelling and grammatical correcting.
Small fixes, right? Yeah. By the way, keep an eye on the CyFun website or the CCB website, ccb.belgium.be. But we also make sure that lots of these news and also the evolutions of the NIS2 adoption actually in Europe. We posted also in the NIS2 LinkedIn group. Have a track on that. I will provide the links to it. So yeah, once something news pops up actually in the implementation, both in the countries, both on new information will be available also online. So keep an eye open. It's good threat intelligence actually to be aligned actually with the implementations. On that level, of course, these trainings like the NIS2 lead implementer and the ISO 27001 and the NIS cybersecurity trainings and PECB can be very useful. Please be aware also shortly. There will be a course available also on the ISO 27400 series, which is providing actually also a guidance and ISO implementations on OT. So it's quite interesting, and of course there are some other courses which actually can align in that sense. Well, yeah, we are back at the end of the presentations. Are there any questions? We have a few minutes left. Actually, we can cover a few Q&A probably. So I'll leave it up to you.
Yes, there have been plenty of questions. We are a bit over time, but we'll take a few of them. So one of them asked, for a person with legal background, how important is the utility of NIS2 and other certification from PECB for EU job market? and mention other certifications as well. So maybe, Peter, I can leave this for you. You've been working with PECB long enough.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, because actually we get also the question from the other end, like DPOs, for example, and certainly nowadays more and more also in the CISO area, and we will see that these areas like DPO and CISO and the legal profiles getting closer to each other, and I think it's a very valid question, certainly in the NIS2 context. Depending on the region, depending on the activities, there are quite some requirements from a legal perspective, actually, that will impact your company. And to put it very simple, for example, in NIS2, there's a direct accountability for managerial functions in the company. There is a very strict approach into negligence, for example. And it makes in some of the cases even employees directly responsible if they don't follow the rules. For example, if they ignore the training and awareness, if they ignore the strict guidances, for example, and they might cause data leakage or even cybersecurity incidents. That there might be a huge and a very important legal impact. So yes, even for legal perspective, legal education is quite important to also get some hands-on experiences in what security is. And Johan perfectly explains that the principle of PPT, people, process, and technology, will have more and more legal impact in that sense. And I think it's really worth to get the basics. CyberFundamentals is a perfect start for that one. There are also, for all these courses I mentioned, a foundation course, so a limited and condensed training. You don't need to spend the full lead implementer or lead auditor to get actually the basic knowledge in that sense. But yes, it does make sense also for legal to dive a bit into the practical cybersecurity for that, because I suspect in the future there will be some claims, and we still need to see the first major cybersecurity international incidents in that level. But let's see what happens, how the various countries will react under the NIS2 once it's fully implemented.
Thank you. Another question says, in the UK, we have the Network and Information System, NIS, Regulations 2018, and Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill forthcoming, under development as of April 2025. It will expand the NIS regulations, and the question is, if we are compliant to NIS Regulation 2018 Act and the forthcoming CyberSec Resilience Bill, do we still need to be compliant to NIS2 when working with clients outside of the UK?
Let me put my view on that one, Johan. I don't know if you have a clear view on it, but please consider right now the UK, due to the Brexit, as a third party in that sense, just like the US or just like any non-European country. So if you operate services here in Europe, it will apply. I'm not sure. I need to check if there is compatibility under NIS2, like we do have a mutual recognition or a compliance actually in GDPR. But in this case, it really doesn't matter in that sense. If there's any local legislations, for example, in the UK, you still need to apply for the operations actually if you operate infrastructure in Europe. So very likely the legislation will force you to apply the same measures as what Johan explained under the UK Act. So it's very likely compatible, but please be careful to map it, to check it, because it's different and it's not automatically recognized.
Okay, one other question says, how should we interpret CyFun gives presumptions of NIS2 compliance? What are the concrete elements that should be produced to fully demonstrate compliance, and not only presumption to the authorities?
Okay,
that's one for you, Johan.
Yeah, I'll try to explain. With a presumption of conformity, that we'll say is, okay, you have implemented correct measures, and you can use them to show that you have done everything that it's possibly needed and in your force to implement the correct controls and measures. But it's a presumption of conformity. This will not say that it will be 100% conform, because if you're reading CyberFundamentals, in the current version, there are some things missing in CyberFundamentals that are still in the NIS2 law. But it's a good step up, and you can use it within your country if it's agreed, if there is a mutual recognition on the European accreditation part. Then you can say, okay, we've implemented CyberFundamentals. It's assessed by an accredited CAP. We have a verification on the level basic or important, or we have a certification on the level essential. But again, it's in your own country that it should be agreed on the performance, presumption of conformity or not.
It's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same what Johan explains right now. If you say, and if you can show a certificate of the ISO 27001, then you can assume there is a certain level of documentation. There are basic processes. So that's exactly what Johan explains by that assumption you have. So if you apply the grounds Johan explained in the CyberFundamentals, sorry, then you should assume, and you can actually consider that certain things should be in place. Still, it needs to be verified, but by using a sort of common method, it should be very easy actually to check it, and the process to verify the things should be simple.
Yeah, it's the same for the ISO 27001 certification. It's not because you have an ISO 27001 certificate that you're NIS2 compliant. I mean, it depends on the scope of your certificate. It depends on the statement of applicability, and yeah, also ISO 27001 is not covering all requirements that are stated in the NIS2 legislation. So be careful with that as well.
So you have a basic structure, but you still need to check a few things, but you're using common language, common approach, so it's very easy to check if you use that best practice, certified best practice, or implemented best practice. I hope that's an answer actually to the question.
Okay, and last question that is somewhat similar to the previous one. Are you working with ISO to recognize CyFun as ISO 27001 equivalent? Right now, it is only the other way around. I think this question is directed to Johan, but Peter, you can add in.
Yeah, currently there is no idea, or there is no, I don't think there are any plans to do that. We created
actually, it's a bit of the CyberFundamentals, due to what Johan explained, is only part or smaller part actually of ISO 27001. So ISO 27001 has a more general framework, and the CyberFundamentals is mainly covering a part of that one. It's an add-on. If we would extend, or if the CCB would extend the CyberFundamentals to have the full coverage and literally all items actually on the ISO 27001, yeah, it will be a very large framework, and that is not the purpose of the CyFun. As Johan explained, it's a step-up model actually towards ISO 27001. So it's literally built actually as a puzzle to keep building on a few things, not the other way around. So there's a one-way move, and the CyberFundamentals is only a part of the 27001. Please be aware that the 27001 is a very large and very broad framework. And if you would add, for example, ISO 27017, 27018, and 27032, which I mentioned in the beginning of the slide, then you can come close to the CyberFundamentals, but then you have a very large and robust system, and the CCB has explicitly developed the CyberFundamentals to make the entry lower and easier to access, also for smaller organizations. So it is not very likely that they will take it the other way around, because that defeats the initial purpose of the CyFun in that sense.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Johan. So all of the unanswered questions will be addressed and published in the next edition of the PCB magazine, as well as on the LinkedIn article that will be emailed to you along with the recorded sessions once it has been posted on our website in the upcoming weeks. Now, before we wrap up today, I'd like to leave you with something very valuable for your ongoing professional development. Peter, if you could go back a slide to the PCB skills slide. So PCB Skills is our on-demand learning platform created to help professionals like you stay ahead with flexible, bite-sized training capsules. Now, whether you're building expertise in cybersecurity, ISO standards, data privacy, or leadership, PCB Skills gives you access to more than 3,000 courses anytime and anywhere. Now, if today's webinar inspired you to deepen your knowledge, I highly recommend exploring PCB Skills. It's perfect for individuals looking to upskill, stay compliant, or explore new domains in information security, risk management, and beyond. If you're interested, please reach out to marketing.skills@pcb.com to book a meeting and explore the catalog. No extra fees after registration, just one subscription and full access. Now, once again, a quick reminder, the recording of this webinar along with the presentation slides will be available on our website and YouTube channel in the upcoming weeks. And an attestation of webinar completion will issued within a week to all participants who attended this session for at least 60% of the live session. Thank you all for the time and engagement today. And a very special thanks to our panel, Peter and Johan, for delivering such an insightful session. We hope to see you at our upcoming webinars. Take care and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.